Hi, it's Jimmy, and Olive from A Book Olive made a new tag called the Nonfiction on Booktube Tag, and I thought I would do it because I like nonfiction, so here we go. First question is, how much nonfiction do you read? I read about 50-50 fiction and nonfiction, so how much I read depends on how much I'm reading in general. Question 2 is, what kind of nonfiction videos do you make or do you want to make on Booktube? Well, most of the videos I make are book review / discussion type videos. Every now and then I'll do something like a tag or a readathon, so my answers or selections of those will be a mix of fiction and non-fiction. So generally I just mix in my non-fiction content the same way I do my fiction videos. Question 3, what's your favourite subgenre of non-fiction? I would say probably history from the mid-19th century till the 20th century. History with a sort of social element or a political element or something like that. I'm interested in history of revolutionary movements from the Paris Commune to the Soviet Union to resistance to the Soviet Union. But I also just like non-fiction on anything that I'm interested in or that gets me excited. Question number 4 is, what's your favourite non-fiction book? So my official favourite book is also a non-fiction book, so it's officially my favourite non-fiction book, and that is Communal Luxury by Kristin Ross. And the tagline, subtitle for that book is The Political Imaginary of the Paris Commune. It is kind of a history book, but it's not talking about the narrative of the events as much as the ideas and the characters and the people. And there are so many vibrant, interesting characters who had so many interesting and inspiring ideas that feel really fresh. Some of them are reminiscent of ideas that people talk about today, and you think, oh blimey, they were talking about them 150 years ago. And some of them they were talking about back then, and you feel like, oh, we really should be talking about these ideas today because they're so relevant and fresh. And some of the characters are just so slightly unexpected in an entertaining way. So the line I always quote from the book is, there's one page in there that starts off with the line, "The art of the shoe," he wrote from exile, which I just think is brilliant because firstly, the idea of the art of the shoe that's already got me interested. Secondly, he's in exile. What's he been exiled for? And why have they exiled someone who's so into shoes that they're writing about the art of the shoe? And he's been exiled, something serious is going on, and yet he's still so passionate about the shoe that he's writing about the art of the shoe from exile. So I just want to know more. What's he been exiled for? What is the art of the shoe? Why is he talking about it? And it's full of such rich characters and ideas like that. That's why I really like that book, Communal Luxury by Kristin Ross. Question 5. What do you think keeps people from wanting to read more non-fiction? I think often it seems less accessible, it can seem boring or dense, it might seem interesting but not emotive or exciting like fiction does, and not good for escapism, which is what a lot of people read fiction for. But I'll go straight to question 6. Why do you like non-fiction? And I like non-fiction for the same reasons I like fiction. I can learn something from it, it can make me feel things. So contrary to the expectation that a non-fiction book might be interesting but not emotive or exciting, I feel like something like Red Famine by Anne Applebaum is one of the most sort of upsetting books I've read and some of the strongest feelings I've gotten from a book. It can be great escapism because it might be, although it's all true, it might be about a world and an experience that is so far from my own that I can insert myself into it. Or, for example, I read Peter Crouch's book, How to Be a Footballer, which is quite funny and light-hearted and is full of stories about his experiences as a professional footballer. And I read that when I was going through a really difficult time this year, and that sort of took me out of the difficult realities of my life and into this, what feels a bit like a fantasy world, but it's very light reading, very entertaining. It can be exciting, it can change my worldview, It can make me feel like I can make my life better and I can make the world a slightly better place. And I think fiction can do all of those things, and so can non-fiction. So I think if you're scared of non-fiction, or you feel like it will be boring, or it won't give you those things that fiction can, I would say it can give you that. And likewise, if you're a lover of non-fiction and you feel a bit tempted to get a bit snobbish about fiction, I feel like fiction can do all of those things as well. A lot of my favourite fiction books draw on the experiences of the author, or their knowledge and their research, and there's a lot of truth in there, and you can learn a lot about things you don't know about, even though it's through the setting and the world that a fictional book is set in. Question 7. What's a non-fiction book you read because of Booktube? I have to admit, I went through all of the non-fiction books that I'd read on Goodreads since I've been on Booktube, and I don't think I read any of them because of Booktube. So I've picked one that I would like to read because of Booktube, and that is Into Thin Air by Jon Krakauer, which Alex Black talked about on her channel, and sounds like a really interesting book about a year when there was a particularly high rate of tragic deaths among people trying to climb Mount Everest. And the author, Jon Krakauer, happened to have tried to climb Mount Everest that year. So he knew some of the people who died, and he was involved and got first-hand experience of what it was like and why maybe so many people died that time. So that sounds like a really interesting book. So check out Alex's review on that, and that is one that I would like to read because of Booktube. Number 8, what's the best non-fiction book you've read lately? I'm going to say The Lonely City by Olivia Laing, which is part memoir, part art history, part almost a manifesto on the nature of loneliness and reflections on loneliness, and especially in particular the experience of loneliness in a big city where you're surrounded by people and you have unique experiences like being in a tower block and looking out your window at another tower block, and you can see into a dozen people's houses, and you can see their shadows as they move about, and they can look up and see you, and you're walking about the city and you can all see each other, but the experience of that while being really lonely for one reason or another. And she talks about all these different artists who lived in New York where she was when she did the research for the book, although the author's English. And I felt like I learned so much about their art, about their lives, and through that, a reflection on just the human nature of loneliness made me think about my own experiences of loneliness. So I thought it was just a brilliant book. There's so much in there, and it's so well written that I would recommend it to anyone who wants a thoughtful and interesting and at times difficult and upsetting but really illuminating read. Question 9. What are some of your non-fiction reading goals? I don't really know if I have any non-fiction reading goals specifically. In terms of reading in general, I'd like to do more of it and increase my rate of reading, which has slowed down a lot since I've had some difficult times this year. So I'd like to just read more, and that will include reading more non-fiction. I'd quite like to read more sort of collections of books on or around particular topics. I tend to read non-fiction on quite diverse topics. I feel like if I read on more specific topics, several books, I might get a deeper understanding, and which I'm a bit lacking on a lot of the things that I'm interested in. I just have kind of a broad understanding of. Number 10. What's your advice for incorporating more non-fiction into your reading diet? I would say take recommendations from someone who knows your taste. Take recommendations from someone whose taste you trust on Booktube or that you know in real life, or go into a bookshop and ask someone who works there or a librarian, and just go for it and see if you enjoy it. Go to the library, find 3 or 4 books that have been recommended to you or that look interesting and look like you'll enjoy them. Just check them all out and then just read one of them. Even though you feel like you're not going to enjoy it, you're putting it off, just go for it, and I bet you'll enjoy it more than you expect. Bonus question, give some recommendations of non-fiction booktube channels that you love. So, I've got quite a list. First, Grow the Book by Charlotte. It's a very new channel, but she reads a mix of fiction and non-fiction and children's and things like that. She's especially interested in LGBT issues, so there'll be plenty of non-fiction, especially on that topic, on her channel. Check it out and subscribe. Alex Black, who I already mentioned, recommending Into Thin Air. She reads all sorts of things, both fiction and non-fiction, and does really good reviews that are really insightful and balanced and interesting. So definitely a good channel to look at if you want to see some great reviews and get some good recommendations for non-fiction you might enjoy. Sarah at Your True Shelf, again reads a mixture of fiction and non-fiction. She's a doctor and she's especially interested in reading books by doctors and ex-doctors and people who've left medicine and their reflections on that. And because she's got that personal connection to medicine, she always has interesting thoughts and connections on those topics, as well as a lot of different things that she reads. Marina at Young, Gifted and Black, again reads a mix of fiction, non-fiction, plays, poetry. She mainly reads books by African authors and black authors from around the world, including non-fiction and fiction, and I've heard of so many interesting books that I'm desperate to read from her channel that I haven't heard talked about elsewhere on Booktube. So that's a must follow channel if you want to hear about those great books that you might not hear about otherwise. Charlie Brooke, she's another fantastic YouTuber who reads a mix of things, and she's so thoughtful, and her wrap-ups and reviews are always full of insights and can really make you want to go and read one of the books that she loved because of the way she talks about it. Gaia Athena, another fantastic booktuber who reads a great mix of things. Her reviews are often really in-depth and insightful and they can be really helpful for helping you decide if you want to read them or not. She's talked about all sorts of non-fiction books, but recently on some of her videos she's talked about memoirs of people who've had autism and ADHD and both. So that's a great channel if you're interested in those sorts of topics, as well as a mix of other things. Rosanna Sunley, her channel I think is on hiatus. She hasn't done a video for a couple of months, but she reviews almost exclusively non-fiction books that are mainly about business, or they're aimed at entrepreneurs and people who are interested in that sort of thing. So if you want to hear about those kinds of books, then hers is a channel to go and watch. She's reviewed tons of books, so even if she's not uploading at the moment, there's plenty for you to go back and watch. And then a couple of big channels. Simon Savage at Savage Reads. He's just amazing channel. He reads so widely and he seems to know everyone cool, so he has interesting interviews with all sorts of people. He keeps up with a lot of the literary prizes and things like that. So he is a good person to follow to hear about the latest and what's coming out, the most exciting non-fiction and fiction at the moment. But great person to follow. Jen Campbell is another big booktuber. She's also quite well connected with authors and literary prizes and news and developments, and she writes books herself. She talks about a mix of things, fiction, non-fiction, poetry. So that is the non-fiction on Booktube Tag. If I mentioned your channel, consider yourself also tagged if you'd like to do the video, but no pressure if not. And either way, thanks for watching.